morning, depends on whenever you are. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us tonight. My name is Dr. Frank Chen, the chairman of the organizing committee of the Chiao Alumni Summit Series. We're very pleased to be able to welcome you back, those of you who have been with us for a long time previously, as well as those who are new to this event, probably invited through some regional chapters or other connections such as the Johns Hopkins. So before we start, let me have a brief introduction about the event series and its organizers, the Chiao Alumni Association in America, or CTUAAA for short. Its first chapter of this organization was founded in LA in 1943 by renowned alumni, now the late alumni such as Chen. Ever since its inception, this fellowship has grown significantly across this continent. Now we have 10 chapters spanning both US and Canada, and serving tens of thousands of alumni in different regions. In the year of 1964, this association held its very first alumni summit. Then it soon became a tradition, a great tradition and signature event, which occurs every 5 years. Now it's 60 years. Through the 60 years, it has played critical roles not only in the school history, but also made pivotal impact in the modern history of Sino-American relationships, especially in the early 80s and 90s. The next summit was scheduled in 2020 in Washington, D.C. It's my great honor to invite all the audience to this event. Yes, you heard it right. It's in 2020, but due to the pandemic, it has been postponed until next year. So to observe this great tradition and make up for your loss, we have launched this year-long online event series. So each month, we'll meet up here online to discuss an important topic together with our invited speaker, either within or beyond our alumni community. In today's event, we'll join force with the Committee 100 to discuss a topic that definitely carries weight to this very population, the Chinese contribution to the American society. I believe at this trying moment, this issue is very relevant, very important, and much present. So let me have an introduction about our today's speaker, Ms. Ray Zeng. She's the director of the programs and key initiatives of Committee 100. She brings diverse cross-sector insights into the issues ranging from both business and social entrepreneurships, healthcare to arts, and she has quite a enriched experience working in different cultural settings. She brings quite a great deal of perspectives for the U.S.-China relation from both grassroots and public policy level. Ray has a very solid educational background. She is a graduate from Cornell with double major in economics, psychology, and minor in art history. She also holds a master's degree in the international development and international economics from the Johns Hopkins University. Then she completed an educational program at Penn and finished certificate training in Middlebury College. And besides the chapters, our association, several other groups like the Johns Hopkins also help promote this event among their different various communities, including the SAS China Club, newsletter, and Hopkins Club for Innovation Entrepreneurship. We're very, very grateful for these organizations and individuals for their support. So I hope my intro has helped setting up the stage. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Ray, the speaker tonight. Let's put hands together to give her a virtual but warm welcome. Ray, thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Chen, for your kind introduction. And I really just so honored to be here tonight, especially both Dr. Chen and I, we are SAIS Johns Hopkins alumni. So it's particularly a great opportunity to offer this, to share the finding of this presentation with, I call it home community. So just a little bit about Committee of 100 before I start. The Committee of 100 was founded really 30 years ago with the dual mission of, on one hand, to promote the full participation of Chinese Americans, and at the same time to ensure that the level between people to people exchange from US-China are engaged at the level. So since we have it's a membership organization of about 130 or so prominent members in business, arts, law, and so forth sectors. So originally it was founded by I.M. Pei, Yo-Yo Ma, Oscar Tang, Henry Tang, and very well-known Chinese Americans. And I encourage all of you to follow us, tag us, and share your learnings from today's talk. And we have our Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook channels. Next slide, please. So before I start with today's talk, I just wanted to ask a few poll questions to gauge our audience interest. And this would also help me better pivot and focus my talk. So if you can take your time and answer this question, I will give everyone 30 seconds. Take a guess. Feel free to share your results. Great, I think time's up. Grace, can you let us know the results? What do people think? Wow, great, we got it. Indeed, the answer is Chinese food would rank for first. Next question. Seems like this group knows the culture very well. Take a guess. Let's see the results. Interesting. So the actual answer for this poll is the last selection, below 15,000. And so I will talk more about this. Again, this shows the diversity of our community. And our final question, I promised. Great, if I can trouble Grace to share the results with us. Wow, so it's equally, we have science, technology, we'll definitely cover, and it seems arts and culture and entrepreneurship and business leadership are our top 3 topics that this audience mostly interested. So great, I will aim to pivot my talk, focus on these 3 sections. So first off, thank you again for participating in the poll questions. Really helped me understand where our community is at. So for today's talk, I will go over the study, research findings, key takeaways, and calls for action. Now, this report, next slide, please. can be accessed on the Economist website. My team will share the link to this group in the chat box, and I highly encourage you to read it for more in-depth information and analysis. Next slide, please. So the question on your mind perhaps is, why now? You know, Committee of 100 released the report in early February this year at a time where, you know, looking at internationally, geopolitical tension is rising on the international front, particularly between the US and China. And on the domestic front, there's increasingly nationalism, anti-immigration sentiment, together with Black Lives Matters movement, all calling for social justice and opposes systemic racism. So furthermore, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, our community has seen an increasing rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. So it's pivotal for us to examine the Chinese American community's contribution to the US. As Winston Churchill once said, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So since their arrivals in the country, people of Chinese descent alongside other immigrant groups have played an important role in the building of the nation. And really, it's important for us to let's look at, you know, the demographics of our community. So next slide. As you can see from the graph that the Chinese American community contains many different groups and cohorts reflecting complex migration patterns, past and present. So today, approximately 5.3 million in the US are of Chinese descent, and 75% are American citizens, henceforth referred to as Chinese Americans. And Chinese Americans make up 1.2% of the US total population. While the majority of Chinese American aged older than 25 have a bachelor's degree or above, compared with a 1/3 of general Americans in the same age cohort, 20% of Chinese American aged 5 and older still cannot speak proficient English. That's doubling the share among Americans in general. And the question that I asked earlier is, as you can see, that although the community overall has an income level above the national average, roughly 1 in 10 households earn less than $15,000 per year, and 35% have incomes below the national median. So this diversity is a result of the community's immigration and integration history, which has intertwined with legal and social evolution in America's society, as well as geopolitical shifts, which I will go into next. Next slide, please. So the Chinese American community today is present across all states in the US, with members ranging from first-generation immigrants to fifth and sixth-generation descendants, and representing great social economic diversity. So this diversity, of course, is the result of over 170 years of immigration and integration. As you can see from the left graph, over 1/5 of Chinese Americans identify themselves with at least one ethnic descent other than Chinese. So they arrived in the American West amid the gold rush. Later, as the economic depressions hit the West in the 1870s, anti-Chinese and anti-Asian sentiment and violence grew among white workers. So many Chinese Americans moved to the East, Midwest, and the South, where their presence was better tolerated. So by the turn of 20th century, Chinese Americans reside in every US states. Of course, we have key neighborhoods, key states such as California, New York, Hawaii, Texas, and DC having the largest communities. Next slide, please. Mirroring their immigration experience, the domestic integration of Chinese communities have been neither smooth nor linear. So historically, the Chinese arrived in the US in several ways, beginning in the mid-1800s early generations, they came primarily as workers in construction, mining, and agriculture, and in some cases actually became small business owners. So we talk about entrepreneurship. Actually, a lot of these Chinese immigrants, they actually are the foremost starting mom and pop shops, really carrying the names of entrepreneurship. So this immigration flow was soon severely limited by discriminatory legislation. This is the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which really banned Chinese immigrants from obtaining citizenship through naturalizations. So for many decades, they faced limited access to job opportunities. So this immigration restriction, alongside other factors, including a lack of Chinese women among the early immigrants and low rates of interracial marriages, resulted in a significant decline in the Chinese American population. So as you can see from the graph on the right, between 1888 and 1940, prior to the repeal of the act in 1943, the number of people of Chinese descent in the US declined by over 1/4, and their percentage in the total population more than halved. Next slide, please. As a result of legal barriers and anti-Chinese sentiment, for decades, Chinese Americans were restricted to the margins of society. They clustered in Chinatown communities that best served their economic, social, and political needs. So facing limited employment opportunities, many started small businesses, mom and pop storefronts, and those who were able to start small factories tended to specialize in less lucrative areas, such as ready-made clothing, undergarments, and slippers, in order to avoid competition with white manufacturers. So 60 years after its installment, the Chinese Exclusion Act was revoked in 1943, primarily driven by the alliance formed between the US and China during World War II. The repeal, together with other immigration policies, especially the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, reopened the immigration pathway to Chinese wage workers, entrepreneurs, and professionals with various opportunities. And as you can see nowadays, we see a lot of inflow of students seeking education and many who stayed after graduation and became US citizens. So over time, a combination of population growth, immigration, and assimilation has created a robust, heterogeneous Chinese American community, which span a diverse income, education, and language levels. Next slide, please. So these studies look at Chinese American contribution across 3 themes. They have contributed extensively to the US economy. They have come to play a greater role in public and institutional life, and they are influential force within US society and culture. So we'll highlight each domain during the rest of our presentation. Next slides. To start off, Chinese Americans today represent a mosaic of communities across a broad range of economic segments. As consumers, employees, business owners, and corporate leaders, we make significant economic contribution in terms of GDP generation, job creation, and capital market growth. And just according to our research, Chinese Americans contributed over $300 billion to US GDP in 2019 through consumer spending and supporting 3 million jobs. And there are over 160,000 Chinese Americans owned businesses in the US, and that's really supporting 1.3 million of jobs as of 2017. So when we talk about entrepreneurship, and again, I found it really interesting that the history of Chinese Americans entrepreneurship can really be traced back to the first Chinese Americans who arrived in the American West during the gold rush. So the lack of established business infrastructure in the region created a gap in the market to meet the demand of a massive influx of fortune seekers from inside and outside the US. So sensing this opportunity, Chinese immigrants started businesses to provide essential services such as laundry. And then they also formed small businesses to serve Chinese consumers and later on provided much needed services. So it's important to highlight that these contributions have been made despite legal and social obstacles. A bamboo ceiling is keeping Chinese Americans out of corporate leadership positions. So the cause of this underrepresentations are complex, but they include both cultural differences and explicit and implicit discrimination. Next slide. On the infrastructure front, as all of you know, infrastructure is fundamental to the functioning of every modern economy. Chinese Americans, we were the first immigrants to play a primary role in building this critical infrastructure. As you know, from the late 1800s with building our rail infrastructure, the US transcontinental railway network connected enormous but fragmented market. And in addition, the advent of rail travel in the US linked manufacturing and agricultural supply chains, also enabled the emergence of heavy industries like iron and steel manufacturing. So after completing the first transcontinental railroad in 1869, Chinese workers, they fanned out across the country to work on other rail lines. So today, freight railroads remain a mainstay of the US economy. Next slide. So thanks in part to the influx of Chinese immigrants who came to the US to study, like many of you, the contribution of Chinese Americans became increasingly visible in academia and science. The integration of Chinese Americans into the US scientific community is evident in the growth and the number of elected as members of professional societies, such as the National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Sciences. And there are the representation of the numerous Chinese Americans working on basic and applied research are also critical to our technological innovation. So as of 2018, 15% of working Chinese Americans are employed in live, physical, and social sciences, computing and mathematics. And this is nearly 3 times as high as the percentage of total Americans who work in these fields. And while persistently underrepresented in leadership positions, some have managed to break the so-called bamboo ceiling. So Chinese Americans founded or served as C-suite executive members in 20 companies in the Fortune 500. There are about 20 or so of them, including our member, Jerry Yang, co-founder of Yahoo, and Eric Yuan, founder of Zoom video communication. And of course, all of you know how that has become an essential tool during these challenging times. Next slides, please. So of course, the US global leadership is built on not only its economic strength, but also its democratic values of liberty, equality, and justice, as well as so having robust institutions are really important. So generations of Chinese Americans have contributed to a more open and tolerant society, from early immigrants fighting for the right to be legally accepted as Americans, to younger generation really nowadays focus on wider civil rights battles in the forms of social movements and even artistic works, affecting not only themselves, but also other minorities and disadvantaged groups. So as you all know, under the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese immigrants were prohibited from becoming citizens. Hence, they were denied the right to vote, giving them no political power to contest unfair treatment. So instead, they turned to the legal system to fight discriminatory immigration and citizenship laws. So 2 cases really stand out for their longer term implication. The first one is Yik Wu versus Hopkins. So Yik Wu was a laundry facility owned owner, and he's a Chinese immigrant in California. Mr. Li, he was sued after he was imprisoned for refusing to pay a fine for allegedly violating an ordinance that was discriminatory to Chinese-owned laundries. So in 1886, the Supreme Court actually ruled in favor of Yi Wu, ruling that it was unconstitutional to discriminate against a group of people. And so this case was the first in a long series of cases to use the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And the decision opened the doors for immigrant integration into US society. And for example, later on, the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education, that the practice of separate but equal, and this is another landmine decision in civil rights history. The other case is the United States versus Wong Kim Ark. This established the concept of birthright citizenship in the US. So Wong Kim Ark is a San Francisco-born Chinese American. He was barred from entering the US upon returning from China in 1894 on the ground that he was not a US citizen under the Chinese Exclusion Act. And eventually the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Mr. Wong. And of course, these landmark cases really set important precedents for equal protection under the Constitution, which really helped establish civil rights for immigrants and non-white Americans for years to come. Next slide, please. As Americans' population has grown more diverse, its political leaders and public servants have, albeit slowly, come to more closely resemble the constituents they serve. So Chinese Americans have been an integral part of this encouraging shift and playing an increasing role in both civil service and electoral politics. And I just want to highlight a couple well-known thought leaders, Harry and Fong, a Republican from Hawaii and the first Chinese American in the US Congress, Gary Locke, our member and co-chair, who served as the former United States ambassador to China, and also the 21st governor of Washington, Elaine Chao. She was appointed as Secretary of Labor and became the first Chinese American to serve in the president's cabinet. So not only did they make important public policy contributions, they also serve as role models for future generations to enter civil service and politics. And more recently, Chinese Americans are really playing a growing role in electoral politics and making a sizable contribution to national defense and security. Next slide. As according to the pool, and this community is really interested in learning more about the arts. And of course, you all know that creating a vibrant society requires more than economic and political forces alone. And this, in addition to utilizing legal and social justice channels to affect change, Chinese Americans have used arts and culture to bring awareness to social political issues. And their contribution ranges from photography to animated film. And also they're very active in the space in fashion and architectural space. And Chinese Americans, we have been long-standing voice in the arts. Pioneers include An Li, best known for his movies Life of Pi, Brokeback Mountain, which integrate themes of multiculturalism, migration. This really is really well respected for his work. Ali Wan, a comedian of both Vietnamese and Chinese descent, with her stand-up comedy specials, and this year in particularly with Chloe Zhao winning an Oscar award, and then as well as the release of the movie Shang-Chi really brought a lot of awareness in terms of AAPI representation in the field. So it's really quite exciting times. Next slides, please. So another topic of interest to this community is public health. And you all know that the US has produced many foundational innovations in healthcare and medicine. A major workforce for healthcare and medical research, Chinese Americans have also played a significant role in strengthening our health system, including during the current pandemic. And some key leaders, including our member, Dr. David Ho, a virologist who really began his career in LA and to help to develop combination antiretroviral therapy for HIV/AIDS. And now he is leading a research team to develop COVID-19 treatment. And did you also know who developed the N95 respirator? That's a Chinese American, Peter Tsai, who is a material scientist. And needless to say, how his invention has kept healthcare workers safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you also know that in addition to the efforts of individuals, Chinese American nonprofits across the country are uniting to fight the pandemic. And at the height of the pandemic, a number of Chinese American individuals and organizations really contribute in donating PPE equipment for medical professions. C100, we also donated a lot of equipment and PPE equipment for Latino and African American communities. And so really in total, there's a recent data collected by the Chinese American United for America nonprofit that since March 2020, more than 690 Chinese American grassroots organizations have raised over 18 million and delivered millions of items of PPEs and meals to hospitals, nursing homes, and other agencies in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slides, please. So having discussed our contributions, we want to also shed light on the challenges. Continuing and evolving barriers restrict Chinese American participation in US society. That resulted in lost opportunities for the country as a whole. So decades of anti-racial jurisprudence, including the effects of Chinese immigrants, has countered and to some extent neutralized systemic discrimination in the form of legislation and bureaucratic oppression. However, considerable challenges remain. Anti-Chinese sentiment linked to US-China geopolitical tension and the pandemic is threatening the safety and well-being of our community. And in addition, the community remains underrepresented in executive corporate positions. So despite a fast-growing population of eligible voters, the community's voter turnout rate has remained below the national level. And as you can tell from the earlier report, that some Chinese American citizens, especially those with limited English language skills and education levels, struggle to advance. So tackling these barriers would unleash untapped economic, political, and creative potential among Chinese Americans, which in turn would benefit the nation as a whole. Next slides, please. As you can see, today, the Chinese American community continues to hold enormous untapped economic, political, and creative potential. And a lot of the barriers that I mentioned also includes a longstanding stereotype of Chinese American as perpetual foreigners, and escalated tension, linked to the rhetoric of linking the COVID-19 pandemic to the China virus, of course, has raised new and renewed challenges. So history has shown that, as has been the case with other minority groups, the more welcoming the US has been to Chinese Americans, the more it has benefited from their presence. So failure to address these barriers would result in a missed opportunity for American society at large. So immediate action is needed to address these obstacles faced by Chinese American, some of which are unique to the community, but many of which are also faced by other communities. So meaningful progress will require efforts from multiple stakeholders, including government, business leaders, politicians, civil society, think tank, academia, and the media. And so only through productive dialogue and engagement on these issues can we really identify our interests, assumptions, challenge our assumptions, and seek solutions. Next slide, please. So the escalated US-China tension and scapegoating linked to the pandemic, our community has seen a rise in anti-Asian hate and violence. So together with leaders from ADL, NAACP, Committee of 100 stands in solidarity with other minority groups and united in the same spirit and mission to denounce all acts of anti-Asian hate and racism. So I encourage you to watch the video on our YouTube channel. We rise together, stopping anti-Asian hate, a special virtual town hall event for more information. And then finally, the most important thing of today's talk is, next slides, please, is how can I help? So our call to action for you is to join us by educating the American public about our history and struggles. We really need to tell our stories better. We demand that the US government respect and protect Chinese American scientists and academics from unfair racial profiling. So recently, for those who know, we partner with the University of Arizona to unveil findings from a new joint research project that focus on race and ethnicity in science and research. So that report is designated to understand how research and academics have been negatively affected by the limitations that the US government has placed on international exchange with China. And the research has a particular focus on the impact on professors and researchers who are of Chinese descent. So for those who are interested in learning more about the report and also with the our video recordings, our team will be happy to share the link. And almost 600 people attended the event, and it really received significant press coverage, including Nature, MIT, Tech Review, Science, and so forth. And also in early September, we also shared another research, really shed light on significant racial disparities in the implementation of the 1996 Economic Espionage Act and under the Chinese initiative. So apart from this, as I mentioned, the barriers breaking down the bamboo ceiling and advocate tangible policy toward greater representation of leadership roles for AAPI across all industry and fields. And we've been hosting a series of Asian American career ceiling panel discussions. They can also be found on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to share with your community who might benefit from this. And of course, I think really more importantly is to encourage your community to vote and let their voice be heard. And one of this part is really to train the next generation of leaders, because they are the movers and shakers of our future and of our communities. And so my call and our call to you is really to build a new bold strategy for the Chinese American community to really use media and leverage all of these new tribalizers in media who are Chinese American to promote issues critical to the Chinese American community, to use your voice to share our stories and let the public be known of our stories and our contribution to American society. And so that's all for me. And I welcome any questions, thoughts.
Thank you so much for this wonderful sharing. So just to connect to your slides, the former secretary, Yijun Shau, just mentioned in 4 slides back in your presentation, was the first speaker to kick off the this year's Chiaotong Alumni Summit Series. So we are on the same floor.
That's wonderful.